They say most life-changing moments happen slowly, like water eroding stone. But some arrive with a click. For me, it started with a morning like any other. The office was quiet, still soaked in early sunlight that slanted through the tall glass windows. Coffee steamed on the corner of my desk, untouched, cooling next to a stack of files that smelled like old ink and legal anxiety. I was halfway through my second sip when a new email popped into my inbox. Subject line: Trust Audit Request. Level 3 priority. Nothing unusual. As a forensic auditor, I'd handled 100 of these. Complex financial entities, cross-state trusts, layered ownerships. Smoke and mirrors disguised as estate planning. It was what I did best. See through the smoke. So I opened the folder, started reading, and stopped cold. Right there, in bold at the top of page 1. Trust name: the Hayes Family Legacy Fund. Primary beneficiaries: Cole A. Hayes, Diane M. Hayes, Thomas A. Hayes. My breath caught, not because I recognized the name, because it was mine, my family, our trust. At first, I thought it was a coincidence. Hayes isn't exactly rare, but the details kept stacking. Addresses, EIN numbers, notarized documents, and then finally, a digital signature, dated just 2 months earlier, with my father's initials. The cold didn't hit all at once. It seeped in. I stared at the screen, blinking, like somehow I'd misread the entire thing. But it was real. Verified. Official. I leaned back in my chair, heart thudding, and just listened. To the silence, to the soft hum of the city outside, to the sudden rush of old instincts kicking in. This wasn't just an assignment anymore. This was personal. And here's the cruel irony. If I weren't who I am, if I weren't trained to sniff out fraud, I never would have noticed. I would have scrolled past it, let it go, like they all probably expected me to. But they'd forgotten something. I'd been invisible for most of my life, which meant I'd become very, very good at watching. I dove in. Ownership trails split off like a spiderweb. LLCs in Delaware, subsidiaries under blind trusts in Nevada, and one particularly odd motel holding company in upstate New York that had no online presence, but had somehow received multiple 7-figure transfers from what should have been our family's retirement vault. My fingers worked faster than my brain could process. I wasn't just investigating, I was unraveling, because every name I saw, every signature, every decision was tied to my half-brother, Cole. And if Cole was managing the trust, that meant one of two things. Either my father had completely lost control, or he never had it in the first place. By the time I leaned back again, my coffee was stone cold, and I was just getting started. They never said it out loud. No one looked me in the eye and said, "You don't belong." But some things don't need to be spoken to be understood. Growing up in the Hayes household was like living inside a framed photograph. Everything looked perfect, every smile rehearsed, every birthday cake custom ordered, every conversation clipped at the edges, as if real emotions might wrinkle the image. And me, I was always the frame. I came from his first marriage, the one no one talked about after it ended. The marriage that came before the money, before the success, before Diane. They met at a charity gala. That's what I was told. She was poised, powerful, the kind of woman who could charm a room with a glance. And Cole came soon after, the golden child, the glue to the new family. I was 13 when they moved into the mansion in Lake Forest. My mother and I lived in a 2-bedroom apartment above a dry cleaner back then. I remember showing up with a duffel bag and a mouthful of questions. None of them got answered. From the moment I stepped inside, it was clear. I was a guest, a polite one, a tolerated one, but never theirs. Cole had his own wing, a game room, a custom pool table with his initials carved into the side. I had a room next to the laundry, no closet door, a twin bed with squeaky springs. They were kind. At least in the performative way, rich families can be kind. Smiles during photo ops. How's school? At the dinner table. But never the kind of warmth that makes you feel held. Just the kind that makes sure no one sees the cracks. At family functions, I was always introduced as Thomas's daughter, never our daughter. People would nod politely, smile thinly, and I'd shrink just a little more inside. I tried, though. Honor roll, early college credits, summer internships I earned on my own. And when I landed my first role in forensic accounting at one of the toughest firms in Chicago, I thought maybe this was the moment they'd see me. Instead, Diane smiled and said, "Accounting? That's nice." As if I'd just told her I got hired to fold sweaters at a mall. Cole, meanwhile, was launching luxury condos he didn't design, backed by capital he didn't raise, wearing cufflinks he didn't pay for, and they treated him like a genius. But the thing about being invisible, it teaches you to notice everything. Every hush in a conversation, every shift in tone, every lie no one else wants to hear. That's why when I opened that file in my office, I didn't call anyone, didn't panic, didn't ask for help, because I'd learned a long time ago, some families won't let you in the front door until you burn the whole house down. Hospitals have a smell, not just the antiseptic kind. It's something colder, like time slowed down and settled into the walls. You can feel it in the air, the way it hums under the fluorescent lights and wraps around your ribs like a whisper you're not supposed to hear. That's what hit me the second I walked into the ICU. The scent of halted futures. Room 324. He was already there, hooked to machines that beeped and blinked like they were translating life into code. Tubes lined his arms. Oxygen whispered through a nasal cannula. The man who used to speak in booming boardroom tones now barely moved his fingertips against a white sheet. My father. There was a time when he filled a room with presence alone. People leaned in when he talked. Waiters remembered his drink. His voice had gravity. Now, it took effort to even open his eyes. I sat beside him, unsure what to say, which is ironic, considering how many years I'd spent rehearsing the words I wanted to say to him. You never stood up for me. You let her edge me out. You never asked how I was doing. Not really. But instead, all I said was, "Hey." His eyes flickered, just barely. I don't know if he knew who I was, or if he thought I was a nurse, or a dream, or a ghost from a part of his life he'd stopped acknowledging. And then I tried. I told him about the trust, what I'd found. I kept my voice low, calm. I didn't accuse. I just asked, "Did you know?" He didn't answer. A part of me wanted him to sit up right then and say, "Yes, I saw it coming. I trusted the wrong son. I should have listened to you." But reality is quieter than movies. He blinked twice. His hand twitched. That was all. And I realized, even if he did know, the version of him who could protect me, the father I always hoped would finally see me, was already gone. He was still breathing, still alive, but unreachable. I stayed there a while longer, just sitting, listening to the machines, watching the shadows stretch across the window as the sun dipped behind the hospital. By the time I stood up to leave, The weight in my chest had shifted. Not heavier, not lighter, just different. I walked out not expecting answers anymore, because the only one who could have given them was locked behind glass and silence. The house looked the same from the outside. It always did. Pristine hedges, polished driveway, a flag waving quietly over the porch, like nothing had ever gone wrong inside. But crossing that threshold again, it felt different, like walking into a museum of curated lies. They were waiting for me in the living room. He sat with one leg crossed over the other, sipping something amber from a crystal glass, like this was just another Thursday. She stood behind the couch, perfectly framed by the floor-to-ceiling windows. Designer dress, barely there makeup. A smile stretched just enough to be civil, but not enough to be kind. No hug, no hello. Glad you could make time, she said. I didn't respond, just placed a thick envelope on the table between us. Paper, receipts, names, shell companies, transfer logs, the whole rotten skeleton. I need answers, I said, because this isn't mismanagement, this is deliberate. He laughed, not a real one, just that quiet, condescending exhale men use when they think you're being emotional. You've always had a flair for paranoia, he said, swirling his drink. It's a trust fund, not a crime scene. I looked at him, at the man who used to borrow my homework answers, and now moved millions through fake LLCs like it was monopoly money, and all I saw was a smirk built on borrowed time. She stepped in next, calm like a lawyer, prepping a press statement. You're overstepping, she said gently, like she was correcting a child. This isn't your business. Your father gave control to Cole because he trusts him. That hasn't changed. My jaw clenched. He gave control because someone manipulated the paperwork. I shot back. Because he was vulnerable, and you knew it. The smile dropped, just for a second. A flicker. Then it was back. You need to be careful, she said, throwing accusations around like that. You could ruin what's left of this family. I stepped closer, close enough to see the way her fingers twitched when I didn't flinch. There's nothing left to ruin, I whispered. The room went still. He stood up then, slow, controlled, like he was rehearsing for a mirror. This is your problem, he said. You've always felt excluded, like you had something to prove. So you dig, you twist things, you convince yourself you're the victim. I smiled, because there it was. The truth they always hid behind polished dinners and polite silence. I wasn't family. I was the reminder, the crack in the portrait. So I turned, grabbed the envelope from the table, and headed for the door. But before I left, I said just loud enough, funny how you all keep calling it our trust, when it's only ever protected one of you. And then I left. No yelling, no slammed doors, just footsteps echoing through a house that no longer felt like mine, because maybe it never was. The elevator ride back to my office felt longer than usual. It wasn't. Same 30 floors, same polished chrome, same polite silence. But this time the air felt heavier, like the walls themselves knew something I hadn't wanted to admit. By the time I sat down at my desk, the city outside was drowning in gold. Late afternoon sunlight hitting glass towers like slow fire. I didn't look at the skyline. I opened the trust folder, and I went in deeper. At first, it was all legalese. Language designed to look official, clean, above suspicion. But that's the trick with white-collar crime. It doesn't hide in the shadows. It hides in the margins. One shell company led to another. Hayes Holdings, LC, registered in Delaware. Dormant. No physical address. From there, money was routed to something called Stonefield Investments, then bounced through two different real estate portfolios with motel addresses across New York, Pennsylvania, and Ohio. The motels were real, barely. Dingy roadside stops with broken signage and one-star Google reviews. Places people disappeared in, not vacationed. But the numbers didn't match the images. One of those motels reported $1.2 million in revenue last quarter. Except they had no website, no credit card processor, no staff listings, not even a business license still in effect. So I did what auditors do best. I followed the money. Transaction by transaction, I mapped it out. The cash flow didn't build anything. It circled. It laundered. It cleaned money that came from somewhere it shouldn't and made it look like income. Fake invoices, overstated renovation costs, reimbursement forms for contractors that didn't exist. And all of it, had passed through the family trust, which meant my father's name was on it. My name, too. And there it was, the real betrayal. This wasn't just about someone stealing. This was about using the trust, our name, our bloodline, as a front, a shield for something far uglier. I sat there, alone, in the glow of 3 monitors, screen after screen, mapping out deceit disguised as strategy. And for the first time since I opened that folder, I felt scared. Because if this wasn't just bad judgment, if it was intentional, then I wasn't dealing with a spoiled heir with poor investments. I was dealing with something calculated, cold, and very, very practiced. And I had a feeling they'd spent years counting on no one looking too close. Until now. She chose a rooftop cafe, one of those places that overlooks the skyline, just enough to make you feel important. Waiters with pressed aprons, glasses that clink too gently, a view designed to distract you from what's really happening across the table. I knew the moment I got the text, it wasn't an invitation, it was a performance. And I showed up anyway, because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that people like her don't confront you when they're confident. They do it when they're cornered. She was already seated when I arrived. Silk blouse, pearls, a smile like an ice sculpture. Beautiful, calculated, and just waiting to shatter. We didn't exchange pleasantries. No, how are you? No mention of my father. Just a nod, and then the menu opened. Like this was any other lunch between family. And then, without looking up, she said it. I know about the Simmons case. My hand froze halfway to my water glass. That name hadn't passed my lips in years. Not since I left my old firm after discovering internal fraud, and was told, in so many polite legal terms, to keep my mouth shut if I wanted to keep my career. A quiet exit, a sealed settlement, a non-disclosure agreement so tight I couldn't even explain why I left. And yet, here it was, laid out on a linen tablecloth between a breadbasket and a wine list. I'm not here to threaten you, she added, folding her napkin like it was part of some strange ritual. I'm here to remind you what's at stake. I stared at her. She didn't blink. Digging into this trust, it doesn't help anyone, she continued. You think you're protecting your father, but really you're putting everything at risk. His reputation, the family's, yours. There it was. Not a scream, not a threat, just a knife delivered with a smile. And I realized then, she didn't care about the money. She cared about the image, the illusion, the family name polished to perfection, even if the foundation was already cracking. If you go forward with this, she said, voice low, You're not just ruining Cole, you're ruining yourself. I didn't speak, didn't move, just folded my hands in my lap and let the silence do the talking. She reached for her drink, ice cubes clinking gently against glass. That was her final move, a toast to manipulation. I stood, no dramatic exit, no final word, just the scrape of my chair against marble and the sound of my heels walking away. Because I'd heard enough. Let them dig up my past. Let them twist it. I wasn't the girl who kept quiet anymore. I was the one walking toward the fire, and this time, I wasn't leaving without lighting something behind me. The county clerk's office didn't smell like corruption. It smelled like paper and old carpet, like secrets filed away in boxes no one touched unless they had to. I sat at a desk under flickering fluorescent lights, a stack of property and tax documents laid out in front of me. My laptop open, phone on silent, no distractions, just numbers, dates, proof. The woman across the counter didn't look up much, just stamped things, typed a few lines, and offered the occasional, But I wasn't there for conversation. I was there to find out just how deep the rot went. The Hayes Family Trust, our supposed safety net, was nothing more than a hollow name at this point. On paper, it still existed, still had a file number, still showed up in legal databases. But when you stripped away the layers, there was nothing. No cash reserves, no active revenue, no liquidity. Just a trail of transactions that ended in zeros and shadows. It was like opening a vault only to find dust. But it got worse. I asked for the current tax status of the family estate. The one I grew up visiting on holidays. The one with the marble floors and glass chandeliers and a kitchen big enough to fit my entire first apartment. She pulled it up on her screen. Her eyebrows raised, just slightly. Delinquent, she said. 3/4 behind. Pre-foreclosure warnings already gone out. I leaned in. You're saying the house? She nodded. It'll go to auction if nothing's paid in 30 days. 30 days. That house, the crown jewel of the Hayes name, the backdrop for every photo op, every Christmas card, was circling the drain, and nobody had told me. I walked out with a manila folder under one arm and a knot in my stomach that wouldn't let go. Cold wind met my face like it knew what I'd just uncovered. They were pretending everything was fine, smiling, toasting, floating on borrowed air, while the roof was collapsing. And the worst part? They didn't just keep me in the dark. They kept themselves there too. They believed in Cole's promises so blindly, so desperately, that they couldn't see they were standing on ashes. I sat in my car for a while, hands gripping the steering wheel like it might stop the world from spinning. No more guessing, no more theories. It was real now. The trust was gone, the house was next, and I was the only one willing to say it out loud. I didn't find it in a file cabinet, not in a lawyer's office, or a bank vault, or a safe behind a painting. I found it in a drawer in my father's bedroom, tucked beneath an old pack of razors, a faded passport, and a single cufflink with no match. It was small, black, unlabeled, just a basic USB drive, sealed inside a plain envelope with one line written across the front in his blocky handwriting. If something happens. No date, no context, just those 3 words. My breath caught. Something about the way it felt in my hand. Cold, weightless. Told me it wasn't just another forgotten file. It was a choice. One he couldn't say out loud, but couldn't leave buried either. Back home, I didn't wait. I slid it into my laptop and hit play. No intro, no setup, just his voice. Raspy. Slow. like he'd recorded it at night, maybe between pills and pain. If you're hearing this, I'm assuming things didn't go the way I'd hoped. My throat tightened. I gave Cole too much power. I wanted to believe he had my instincts, my judgment. I was wrong. I think he's hiding something. Something big. I don't have the strength to fight it anymore. But you might. There was a pause. If this lands in your hands, I'm asking you to look. Really look. Not for revenge. For truth, a long breath. Not a sigh. More like release. Like someone letting go of everything they'd held in for far too long. Then, silence. The file ended. No signature. No dramatic goodbye. Just the sound of a man who finally saw the storm coming and left one flashlight behind. I sat there, staring at the screen. And for the first time in this entire mess, this maze of lies and numbers and silence, I didn't feel alone. He knew. Not everything, maybe, but enough. And more importantly, he trusted me to finish what he couldn't. It wasn't a courtroom with marble walls and dramatic lighting. No judge in a robe, no dramatic jury gasps, just a government hearing room. Beige walls, plastic chairs, a long table littered with water bottles and microphones that popped if you breathed wrong. But make no mistake, this was where everything would change. They came in together, pressed suits, calm faces, confident in the way only people with everything to lose pretend to be. She gave me a tight-lipped smile across the room. He didn't look at me at all. I didn't care. Because this time, I didn't bring emotion. I brought proof. I stood when they called my name, opened my laptop, and connected it to the projector like I'd rehearsed the night before in a motel mirror. The screen lit up. Spreadsheets, diagrams, bank transfers, shell companies registered under names that didn't exist 6 months ago. Then I spoke. Not with anger, not with desperation, with certainty. I walked them through every wire transfer, every dummy corporation, pointed to motel addresses that never filed taxes, showed how the trust money, my father's legacy, had been laundered into fake construction costs and ghost payrolls. They shifted in their seats, and then I played it. His voice, my father's recording. The room went still. You could feel it happen. The moment people stopped wondering if I was just a bitter daughter with a grudge and started listening. I gave him too much power. I was wrong. If this lands in your hands, I'm asking you to look. No one moved. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. Across the table, his jaw tightened. She stared straight ahead, her fingers digging crescent moons into her notepad. When it ended, I didn't say anything. I let the silence speak for itself. The commissioner leaned forward, finally breaking it. I believe we've seen enough. That was it. There was no slow clap, no dramatic outburst, just quiet acknowledgement. And 30 minutes later, they escorted him out. Not in cuffs, not yet, but stripped of the one thing he cared about more than money. Control. He passed me without a word, but his eyes met mine for a second. No hatred, no apology, just recognition. Like he'd finally realized I wasn't just the one who saw through the lie. I was the one who ended it. I thought the hard part was over. I thought that once the truth came out, once the documents were laid bare, and the voices finally heard, something would shift. That maybe I'd feel relief, closure, vindication. But no one tells you what really happens after the curtain drops. The first thing that disappeared was the noise. No more phone calls, no texts. Even people who used to greet me with warmth. Former colleagues, distant cousins, neighbors who once smiled too wide at Christmas parties, started keeping their eyes down when we passed. It wasn't shame, it was fear, like I was radioactive now. The woman who aired her family's sins in public, who dragged reputation through the mud, even if the mud was the truth. Then came the headlines, not the kind that celebrated justice, not whistleblower exposes financial crime, more like estranged daughter destroys trust from the inside. And my personal favorite, family feud turns criminal. They used my name, my photo, pulled old social media posts, dissected my LinkedIn profile like it was evidence of some long brewing vendetta. The comments, I stopped reading them after the first hour. Bitter much? Probably jealous she didn't get her cut. Must be exhausting living with that much hate. It didn't matter that every number added up, that I had the receipts, that I'd saved our name from being turned into a cautionary tale in the SEC's training manual. People didn't want facts. They wanted a villain. And I fit the silhouette perfectly. Even the silence from my family hurt more than I thought it would. No calls from the hospital. No word from him. Not even a scathing voicemail from her. Just emptiness. Like I'd walked into a room and flipped on the lights, and everyone else had run. I sat in my apartment one night, lights off, the city blinking outside my window like nothing had changed. And maybe nothing had, except me. Because for the first time, I realized I wasn't waiting for their thank you, or their apology, or some grand moment of forgiveness. I had told the truth, and while it cost me the version of my life I once thought I wanted, it finally gave me back the one thing they could never own: my voice. The apartment felt too clean, like a hotel suite right after checkout. Blank, emptied of presents. I looked around at the boxes I hadn't even labeled. Not that it mattered. I wasn't taking much with me. Some clothes, a few books, my laptop. Everything else, awards, framed articles, business cards with embossed lettering, stayed behind. They belonged to a version of me I didn't want to carry anymore. I left the keys on the counter. No note, no goodbye, just silence. And then I drove. Out of the city, out of the noise, out of the narrative. Mile by mile, the skyline shrank behind me, steel and ambition dissolving into fields and pine trees. The road curled into rural Vermont, where the air smelled like wood smoke and cold earth, and the only sound was gravel crunching beneath my tires. I'd rented a cabin. Nothing fancy. 1 bedroom, wood stove. No internet unless you stood by the window and tilted your phone just right. And that was the point. No alerts, no articles, no accidental glimpses of headlines with my name in bold. The first morning I woke up before dawn, made tea, not coffee. Tea is quieter. Sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket, watching the sky shift from navy to pearl. It was the first time in months, maybe years, I didn't feel like I was performing. I wasn't the daughter, the auditor, the headline, the disappointment turned whistleblower. I was just still. I read, walked, let my mind breathe. There were no victory laps. No one came knocking to say, "You were right." But I didn't need them to. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for someone to let me belong. I had left the fire and found something quieter. Not happiness, not yet, but peace. And that was more than enough. It came on a Tuesday, folded into a stack of mail that mostly smelled like junk. Catalogs, insurance offers, a flyer from the local farmer's market. But this one was different. White envelope, no return address, just my name. Handwritten, careful cursive, the kind that belongs to someone who pauses before each letter, someone who means every word. I almost didn't open it. I'd trained myself not to expect anything good from mailboxes, not after what had happened. But something about this one. I stood by the window, light pouring in across the floor, and tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper, slightly smudged, the kind of paper you find in a notebook with a missing cover. It read, "You don't know me. We've never met, but I stayed at one of the properties, one of the motels connected to the trust." My pulse slowed. I kept reading. "I worked there, illegally. They said I owed them. Said they were helping me stay off the radar. But I was trapped. No ID, no paycheck, just fear. Until everything shut down. Until someone made it stop." There was a pause in the writing. I could see where the pen had lifted. Maybe she hesitated. Maybe cried. I asked around. No one knew your name, but I found the hearing online. Saw your face. Heard your voice. And then, you saved me. You didn't know it, but you did. You didn't just expose fraud. You gave me back my name. My hand lowered, letter still in my grip. I stared out at the trees, golden with late autumn light, and realized this was the first thank you I'd received. Not from my family, not from friends, not from the world I'd tried so hard to protect, but from someone who had nothing to give me, except the truth. The kind that didn't come with press releases or photo ops. Just a whisper, folded into paper saying, "You mattered." And that was everything. Sometimes I wonder if they ever talk about me. When the family gathers, who's left, anyway? Do they say my name? Do they flinch when it comes up? Or do they pretend I was never part of the story to begin with? I used to care. I used to rehearse imaginary conversations, play out scenarios in my head where they'd call, where they'd finally say, "We were wrong. You were right. We're sorry." But those calls never came. And at some point, I stopped waiting. Because here's the truth no one likes to admit. You can live your entire life trying to be good enough for people who've already decided you're not. You can shrink, overachieve, stay quiet, smile politely while they pass around praise like a bottle of expensive wine, and never offer you a glass. And if you're not careful, you'll wake up one day and realize the person you became isn't even yours. But I caught it before that happened. I told the truth, loudly, publicly, without permission. And yes, it cost me things I'll never get back. But it gave me something else, something no apology could ever replace. It gave me myself. I don't need their forgiveness. I don't need to sit at their table, because I built my own. It's smaller, quieter, but it's mine. And these days, it's enough. Sometimes I still walk in the woods behind the cabin. No headphones, no distractions. Just air and sky and the sound of my own footsteps on frozen leaves. And that's when it hits me. I didn't burn the house down. I just stopped pretending it wasn't already on fire. If this story stayed with you, even just a little, take a second to hit that like button. It helps more than you know. And if you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, or had to stand up for the truth when it cost you everything, tell me in the comments. I read them all. I really do. And if you're new here, go ahead and subscribe for more stories like this. Stories about resilience, reckoning, and rebuilding from the ashes. Because sometimes the quietest voice in the room ends up being the one that saves it. Thanks for listening. I'll see you in the next one.